I'm so excited today to have Michael Buzinski on the podcast. Buzz is a lifelong entrepreneur, digital marketing thought leader, and best-selling author. Dubbed a visionary marketer by the American Marketing Association, Buzz's sole mission is to reduce the prevalence of entrepreneurial poverty in the U.S. Buzz has simplified digital marketing success with the rule of 26 to help entrepreneurs avoid the time drain and frustration of managing profitable digital marketing campaigns. Buzz, I'm so glad you're here. Thank you for being on the show.
Well, thank you for having me. This is fun.
It's going to be a great conversation.
I was looking at your background and I'm like, my wife would love your office. She's like, why don't you do this? Why can't we do this everywhere? Like if it was up to her, we would have
more books.
It would be just a library. We would just live in a library.
Absolutely. How wonderful is that to be surrounded by words? Such a joy.
All my words are in this box right here.
We'll get to that.
Welcome to Catalytic Leadership, the podcast designed to help leaders intentionally grow and thrive. Here is your host, author, and leadership and executive coach, Dr. William Attaway.
I want to start with you sharing some of your story, Buzz, with our listeners, particularly around your journey and your development as a leader. How did you get started?
I've been a part-time entrepreneur since I was a little kid. Actually, I grew up on a farm until I was a teenager. And so my first gig, if you will, was picking up walnuts on my farm. And my grandfather would pay me $1.25 per gunny sack. And a gunny sack to a 6-7-year-old kid is about 3/4 of the height of the kid. So it basically is picking my weight in walnuts for $1.25.
That's awesome.
But it taught me a lot because I would make about $40 in the fall, which was just enough to buy a present for my sister, my mother, and my dad. It was the 4 of us. And I would spend pretty much all of it on those three. And fast forward into my teenage years as a professional musician at the age of 13, part-time working musician, as we call it. So I was a jazz trombonist at the age of 13. That band broke up. We had an album, blah, 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 blah. Started bands at the age of 16 on my own in rock and roll, punk, all these other things, gigging on that. And I always had jobs and to support myself, but most of my money went to my aspiring rock and roll career. And then my first business, technically on my own, was a photography company. We did outdoor portraiture. That was fun, still part-time. And then I joined the service for 10 years and flew around on this plane called the AWACS. I lived in 11 countries, ... And when I got out, it was, wow, I did not go to college and finish a degree. And the stuff that I was looking at for post-military life was stuff in computer science and Microsoft engineering and blah, 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 blah. And I was like, none of it was really tickling my fancy, if you will. And so I didn't end up getting my degree like I was supposed to, blah, 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 blah. So with that said, I got out and I'm like, what do I know? What am I passionate about? And I'm pretty much unhireable. So I'm going to have to start a business around whatever that is. And so originally when I opened my company, it was a recording studio. And I just quickly realized surviving off of starving musicians was a bad business plan.
The customer should actually be able to pay money for a service, right?
Yeah, it's crazy. I mean, I was booked out solid, but I was only charged. This is back in 2005 when I started this, and I was only charging like $55 an hour to be in the studio. And this is before the home studio, digital home studios, and computers, and you could actually, before GarageBand and iPhones and all that other stuff, right? So, so studios were still in high demand, even at the smallest level, and that's I was a learning studio. I had really bad experiences as a recording artist, and so I was like, I'm going to make sure that nobody comes into my studio unless they're ready to record. So I would teach people how to get ready. And then in the studio, I would teach them how to get the best out of their performances and all this. So we went really above and beyond. And I made a whopping $72,000 in sales that year, lived off of 22,000 of it. My rent for my office was 2.5 times more than what I paid for in rent in the apartment I lived in to start. So, I mean, like my life was the business. Everything was for the business. I worked for the business. So we had to pivot quickly, right? I couldn't survive off that. I couldn't have employees on that much money, ... So, we pivoted into a media production house, and I targeted the second poorest demographic for production, which would be small to medium-sized business owners. And with that said, we grew that into a sizable media production house, and this was in Anchorage, Alaska. And so a lot of people think Alaska, they think like Siberia, and it's a modern city. The state is a modern state. It just has a lot of wilderness around where the cities are. And with that, over the years, we grew up into a multi 7-figure creative agency. We had a 13,000 square foot facility. We had dozens of employees, blah, 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 blah. And I hate to say blah, 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 but I don't want to give you the 15-minute version of my life story here. So about 2018, though, I was sitting in this brand new facility that we had just built about 1.5 years, 2 years prior, and going, I'm absolutely miserable. I hate maintaining the building. I hate babysitting adults. I am burnt out. And we had grown the business broke, meaning that the cash flow paid the bills, but I wasn't profitable. Can you imagine bringing in multiple millions of dollars and not paying yourself 6 figures? Not even $100,000 is going in my pocket every year.
Wow.
That's the definition of entrepreneurial poverty. And I did all the leadership things. Like we had culture down, we had all of that stuff. But unfortunately, what I didn't do was put in awesome generals. And so my management team failed their subordinates, and therefore I was the failure when it came to helping people transition into what I wanted to do, which was get rid of the building, get rid of this $14,000 mortgage a month, and really focus on getting back to the basics and the strategies that are going to help these SMBs. And so in 2019, at the end of 2018, I shut the whole thing down. They all went away. And I had basically start over with 300 clients and me and an administrative assistant. And there's 300 clients. We had to figure out how to figure, like, what are we going to do? Now we went virtual. So I got rid of all the media production had to go away. Right. But my vision was to go into digital marketing. So we were an all-encompassing creative agency. So that meant we did the media production, we did TV, radio, websites, social media, all of the things, were all encompassing. And so now it was like, well, we're not doing any of that anymore, right? We're just going to be looking at the strategies and the digital side of things. And so for the last 5 years, that's what we've been doing. And it's been great. We're 7 times more profitable. I don't work 90-hour work weeks anymore. I go on vacation on a regular basis. I was able to take my wife to Peru for 3 weeks for her 40th birthday a few years ago, and not even think about my business. It runs without me. And that is my story.
That's an amazing story. And I would imagine if I were to talk to you 20 years ago and describe that to you, it would have been hard pressed for you to believe that it was going to have those twists, those turns, so many unexpected elements. But there's no such thing as a wasted experience. Every one of those turns and twists made you into the leader that you are today, even the ones that were less than pleasant at the time.
I agree with that.
So in your book, you talk about the rule of 26 and how this helps small businesses. And I know a lot of the people who are listening, they're business owners and they're where you were. They're running on this treadmill. They are trying like crazy to generate the profits needed to keep the whole thing running. While at the same time, they're not where they could be. How does the rule of 26 help?
I wrote the Rule of 26 at the beginning of the pandemic when I saw so many micro businesses and small businesses and mom and pops and brick and mortars, the people that we didn't at the time serve, struggle without the support that they needed in their marketing. I mean, they had to pivot immediately. Like, you're talking about a brick and mortar that does, some of them didn't even have websites. And then all of a sudden, well, you got to close the doors and you still got to figure out how to pay your mortgage.
Yep.
Right.
And your staff, if you have one.
Right. And so I think that I know that the complexities of marketing are what suffocate people and basically leave them in analysis paralysis. Right. And so when I was like, okay, we've got to be able to at least teach people how to focus on the right things, because there's so much noise out there when it comes to marketing. Right. And I'm a fundamental marketer. Like, let's look at the fundamentals of your marketing, and then we can play with all the toys and the shiny new objects and blah, 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 and we can squirrel out. But without the fundamentals, none of it works. None of it. And so I was like, how can we get back to the fundamentals in a way that doesn't take a long time? Because a lot of times you'll go with the consultant, they're like, in the next 6 months, we're going to find out who your ideal client is and blah, blah, blah. I'm like, no, that should take about a week.
Right. Can we speed this thing up a little bit,
Marketers are marketers, right? So they're marketing themselves for the longest engagement possible, right?
Yeah.
And for me, I'm like, I'm engaging in the best outcomes possible, because that creates longevity. I've got clients that have been with me for over 15 years through the thick and thin. They were with me when I was a creative agency. And they're like, wow, actually, Buzz, I love this new direction you're going in. We're getting more attention. We're getting better results because we streamlined so many things. We're able to focus on what we're really good at. Right.
Yep.
And because of that, we have frameworks, we have blueprints. And one of the things is the Rule of 26, where I simplified what you should be looking at down to 3 key performance indicators, or what we call KPIs. Now, for those who don't know, there are hundreds of KPIs you can look at in marketing. And a lot of marketers use what we call vanity metrics to substantiate the fees that they want to continue to charge you. And I'm like, you know what? If I could just pull back the sheet here and show everybody, like, listen, here's 3 KPIs that actually move the revenue needle. Oh, revenue. I like revenue. That's
novel.
The only thing you're worried about is revenue, right? Like a business without revenue is not business, right? So I'm like, why don't we focus? What are the key the KPIs that actually move the revenue needle? And I boiled them down to these 3, which is the traffic, conversions, and your average revenue per client. And I looked at the relationship between them, and I noticed that there was a leveraged outcome when you had them working together. And so I came up with 26, the Rule of 26, because if you increase each by 26% independently, that they will create twice as much revenue, regardless of where you're at, right? Now, I could have said 50%, I could have said 75% and get like 8x. But like you said, like, what you don't know, if you look too far ahead in the future, right, you're not going to understand what that means. But if you're at $100,000 and you're trying to get to $200,000, you get what that means. If you're at $500,000 and you look at $1 million, you're like, I can understand that. And so on, right? So I'm like, okay, so let's start with the end in mind and just double your revenue. That would be, everybody's like, I can do that math, right? Anything times 2, let's go, right? Boom. Oh, and and 26% is not a hugely significant amount of increase. I mean, when we're talking like traffic, most websites for SMBs, especially in the B2B service space, you're only seeing 500 to 1,000 people. So 26% is only 260 more visitors for 1,000, right? That's only 130 if you only have 500. Conversion rates, your average conversion rate for a B2B website, 2.6 to 3.7, 26%. Is like in the tenths of percentiles that you're increasing, right? Like 0.75. If you're at a 3 3%, you're right over 0.75% increase in your conversion rate to increase it by 26%. Right? So each of them are simple. Is it easy? No. Mark, if it was easy, everybody would do it. We'd all be rich, and you and I wouldn't have to have this conversation. So, but if we simplify it, at least it becomes something that we can approach with confidence, because that confidence from the business owner is what's needed for marketing to actually be effective. Otherwise, they will self-sabotage, not even knowing it.
Well, and I think that simplification is incredibly helpful to small business owners, because as one myself, I'll tell you, you start talking about marketing and I start to feel incredibly overwhelmed very quickly. Because not only are there a zillion different options, that's a technical term, technical number there. There's a zillion different options. So many different options, so many different levers to pull and buttons to push. But you have to constantly be adapting and adjusting because things change, and things change in the digital marketing world. It feels like on a weekly basis. Oh, this algorithm. Oh, well, Google changed how they're doing it. Oh, well, Facebook. Oh, well, I mean, okay. Like, who's going to keep up with all that? Right. I don't have time to keep up with all that because I'm focused on what I do. Right. And so that's where somebody like you comes in, because you bring in the expertise, you bring in the proven track record, you bring in the knowledge of things like the rule of 26. And you can then say, hey, William, here are 3 things. These are the 3 things we're going to focus on. And this is what I think we should do. You know how refreshing and encouraging and calming that is?
Calming. I like that. I haven't heard it described as calming. The calming rule of the rule of 26.
It's just, there's so many. I mean, you think about it like in the middle of a storm. There's so many waves, and right.
I love it.
Oh, hey, this is why I hire somebody to handle accounting. I'm not going to learn the tax code. I'm not, and I'm not going to have decades of experience learning the tax code. I need somebody who knows what they're doing. And I think a lot of small business owners come to marketing first, perhaps thinking, oh, I can just figure it out myself. Right?
That's the majority of them.
And when you see that,
you just ask, hey, how should I market myself?
Write me an ad. Right. Write me an ad.
But how to do it and how to overcome the hurdles that you will end up hitting every single time. I've been in marketing for over 30 years. Right?
That's a minute.
Almost 20.
Yeah.
And still, no 2 campaigns are the same. Period. And
wow. So there's not a cookie cutter, one size fits all, one way that everybody has. And this is so often what business owners hear. This is so often what senior leaders hear. Oh, do this for this price. We'll take care of it. And this has worked for them. It'll work for you.
And they're talking about are tactics and an overarching tactic thinking, well, if you do this, you do that, and this crazy thing is that what they're describing is actually true, but how they get to it being successful is the iterations. It's a scientific process. Marketing is.
Yes.
You're testing hypotheses. I think people will respond if I say this. So if I say this to these types of people who have this type of pain or aspiration, they're going to buy this for this. There's 5 different variables in that equation. You're not going to get all of those right the first time or the second time or the 100th time. You will get iterative increases in response. But when we look at the case studies that people put on their websites and they're like 385%, blah, blah, blah. And you're like, yeah, they probably started with 2% of what they're talking about. And so it's really easy to triple, quadruple a little bit. Right. So if you're just starting out and you're like, well, I started at $100 a month and now I'm 5x my revenue. Well, now you're at $500. Congratulations. You can make a car payment. Now,
maybe depending on the car.
Yeah, exactly. And that's not including your gas and your insurance. So So I have a saying that says there's lies, there's damn lies, and then there's statistics.
Yeah.
Okay. Statistics can tell you whatever you want. Okay. And as marketers, we know how to utilize statistics to our advantage. And it's our not advantage, not our client's advantage. Okay. Now, this is something that when we're doing our case studies, I'm like, okay, let's look at the actual stats that were good for the client, not for us. I don't want the biggest number. I want the most impactful number. So you'll go to my website and there's some of the stuff that's like, yeah, it increased it by 24%. And people are like, well, that's not very big. Well, actually, if you take a look at what that means to revenue, yes, it does. Because if I increase your traffic by 24% and your conversion rate stayed the same and your average revenue per client stayed the same, you have 24% more revenue. Now, if you're doing $100,000, that's $24,000 on your top line. So 24% is pretty cool. But if you say, well, my social media engagement was up by 240%. Okay, and how many of them became buyers?
Right. Oh, exactly.
So who cares?
Exactly. That's the vanity metrics you're talking about.
The vanity.
So with decades under your belt, what is the biggest mistake that you see small businesses making when it comes to marketing?
When it comes to marketing, there is what I call the 5 crises of marketing in the modern day business. And as an acronym, 5. I know there's only 4 letters. I'll get to that. But there's 5 crises in there. First is focus. What are you focusing your business on? So many people go into business, especially, and I, so everybody understands, I am a B2B service provider specialist. Okay. I used to be a generalist for decades, right? Or almost 2 decades. And just this last couple of years, we're like, you know what, let's get really good at like one niche. There's plenty of good marketers out there. There's hundreds more, thousands more bad marketers. So I'm like, okay, so if we can band together and find out like who's doing what really well. And so I start running into people. I'm like, wow, you've got that niche down and you've got that niche down. So we're looking at the B2B side. Okay. So in the B2B service providers sector, we go into business and we'll take anybody who will come in the door and pay us money to do something. Right. And so your first phase of being a business owner is creating financial independence. Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So all money's good money at the beginning, but when you start getting into entrepreneurial freedom, once you have established financial independence, that goes away really fast. And that's where the focus comes in. So the faster you can focus, the quicker you're going to get to that entrepreneurial freedom, that second phase of entrepreneurialism. Okay. So with that, focus comes into what are you providing? What is it? What problem do you solve? As a B2B service provider, you have one job: fix problems, alleviate pain. Now, some people, well, I'm actually aspirational and I help people get to their goals. Well, what's keeping them from their goals? Oh, blockades and pain points. You solve a problem, period. That's your job. What problem do you solve? Okay, boom, done. For me, I solve the problem of unprofitable marketing. We're redefining what B2B marketing stands for. We want it to stand for bad to buzzworthy marketing. Okay. So with that focus allows us to get our message and our products really good, like the best in class. Because when you can be the best in class, guess what? You can charge whatever you want. Okay. We'll get to that later. The second one is identity. Now, identity is a twofold, and that's where the 5 comes in. You have the identity of the person who has those pains that you want to alleviate, and then your identity of who you are to that person. So many times we're like, I want to work with blah, 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 blah. They call it the ideal client profile. Okay. I look at the most profitable prospects, or we call the perfectly profitable prospects, or the P3 profile. And because not all prospects are profitable for you, right? So how do I show up to the person I want to serve is just as important as identifying who you want to serve. It's a two-way conversation. So you need to understand how the communication goes back and forth. Without that, your messaging is going to be garbled, and you could be saying all the right things in all the wrong ways, and to the right people, and it's going on deaf ears because you're not saying it correctly. You're not saying it in a wavelength that actually connects with them. Okay, so then with that, once you have your focus and you have good identity for both to and from, and your communications figured out, then we run into the visibility problem. I've got the right product, I have the right message, I'm just not in front of all the right people. I don't have enough visibility. Okay. And then once we get to that, when we start increasing our visibility, then we run into an efficacy problem. We don't know what's working and what's not because we're not tracking it. I call it the 50-50 marketing paradox. 50% of your marketing is working. You just don't know which 50. So you do all of it because you don't know if you stop one thing, whether that will be the thing that was actually making you most of the money. And so the factor of 5 and the 5 crises of marketing is where 90% of the people who come to me have problems.
So practical and so helpful. Like, I love that. I love that teaching. And just as a business owner, it really resonates.
Oh, thank you.
And I imagine that's true for our listeners as well.
I hope it helps.
But I want to spin the dial just for a second.
Okay.
You know, your business, you've talked about the evolution of your business and how it has changed and grown and become what it is today. And your role has changed and grown. And as a leader, your business and your team and your clients need you to lead at a different level today than they did 3 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
That same thing's going to be true 3 years from now. How do you stay on top of your game? How do you level up with the new leadership skills that your team and your clients, your business are going to need you to have?
I have a mindset of if you're not growing, you're dying.
Spot on.
You have to be consistently learning. And you can read 1,000 books on leadership, but until you put them into practice, it means nothing.
So
and sometimes
true.
putting in practice is just asking people, hey,
Yeah.
I read this. Does this resonate with you guys? Would it be better if I did it this way? Asking your
Yes.
people is something that I didn't do enough of before. I would prescribe what I thought they needed versus diving in to what they actually need. Now, when you get a bigger group, now, so most SMBs have less than 12 employees in the United States, right? So that, and it's funny. I'm thinking about like when I had 4 people versus 8 people versus 12 people versus a couple dozen people. I mean, every one of those situations was a different culture, right? Because you had the group that wear all the hats and pass the hats back and forth. That's the 4, right? You have the group of 8 where you now start having a little bit of more specialization in certain things, right? But we're still passing a lot of responsibilities back. A dozen where we start looking at everybody having their place and their SOPs and their responsibilities. And now you have all of that going on. And you start to build a structure to where when you get into that a couple dozen, you have a full structure and you have a hierarchy and you have to have that going there. And so your communication changes with that, right? And so as I look back though, what I was doing when I had a couple of dozen versus the dozen I have now, this is part of why I'm more profitable, is because I have less people doing more effectively. They don't work harder. They work actually less now than we ever did before, getting better results with less stress. And I'm paying better, right? So the efficiencies of leadership will translate into efficiencies in your business. And you only can get there by asking questions of yourself and of your people. And when you stop asking questions is when you'll stop learning and growing. And sometimes they'll ask you questions you do not have answers to, or you'll ask questions that they'll give you responses that you don't know what to do with. And now you have to go back into research mode and go, okay, what does that mean? Yes. I love books. Now, I'm a big audiobook guy now because I can consume audiobooks while I'm working out, running, doing. Today I was sweeping my pool. Guess what? I had an audiobook running. Okay.
Absolutely.
Right. We're putting together
Leverage the time.
and I'm like, well, how
Yeah.
does one run a mastermind? Who's the best at running masterminds? I found out who it was. I bought his book and now I'm listening to it. Right. So I'm
Perfect.
constantly listening, right, to both getting more instruction, right, and in getting direction from my people. So I think that, back in the day, I mean, I grew up in the 80s. You did what you were told. If the manager said so, you just did because you said so. Just like if your parents said something, you said so. Nowadays, not so much. You get an employee, they'll sit there going, I don't feel like that aligns with my personal values. And I'm like, well, I don't think that aligns with the mission and the vision of my company. So get the hell out of here, right? Like, you can't do that. You have nobody there, right? You have to work with your people. They don't work for you anymore. We don't even say that anymore. I hired my CEO. I said, guess what? I need you to work with me. Come work with me.
Yeah.
Just the change of one little word and how you present it to people will change their mindset as how they approach it. And that
absolutely
with that identity in your marketing. Well, your identity as a leader is the same thing. Who do you want to lead? What type of people do you want on your team? When I went remote, the creative agency had average age of the team was like 26. That was the average. And I was the guy in the room at like late 30s, early 40s, right? So I was actually dragging that up, right? That means that most of the people were under 25. Now, the average age is like 36.
Wow.
Who do you want to lead? What mindsets do you want on your team?
Yeah.
And how do they perceive you? Who do they want you to be to them? Do you want to be a boss? Do you want to be a mentor? Do you want to be inspirational, authoritarian? None of these are right or wrong. They're different styles. And that is one of the things I learned over the years is there's no wrong way. There's easier ways. There's harder ways, right?
Good.
And depending on who you want to lead will dictate on how you lead. So when people say, well, you need to do blah, 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 and they go all through those and I can't even think of John Maxwell and all that, they talk about all this, but that's what he does though. He's just like asking questions. Like,
that's right.
He said his moments of genius are like, do you want to work? What is it? I can't think of one right this second. I was like, do you want to work harder or do you want to work smarter? Right. But it's like, well, of course I want to work smarter. Yeah. Okay. Well, then do it. Right?
That's right. That's right.
So what does that even mean? It means something different to everybody. That's why people like him are so popular, because they say things so broadly that a lot of people can go, I can take something from that. Because it simplifies it down to the seventh grade level. Right. And says, okay, that's it. So to answer your question, it's an iterative process. And everybody's on a road. And I tell people, like, were you a better leader today than you were 20 years ago? No. I was a more naive leader 20 years ago. I had different responsibilities as a leader because my organization was different at the time. I was the best leader for my company at that time because I was the only one. And that's okay.
Man, I think there's so much insight there. And so much wisdom that comes from experience, leading teams, leading people, and building something that is way healthier and more sustainable today than it was 10 years ago, to be sure.
5 years ago. Look at your work.
And 5 years from now, even more so.
Oh, gosh, 3 years from now. I mean, we don't even do, we do a 10-year forecast, but nothing on our quarterly and annual goal lists and objectives go past 3.
So that you can adjust.
Eternity now.
Particularly in digital marketing.
In any business, period.
Yeah.
Like, I don't care what you're doing today. If you're in a B2B service-centric business, it is changing.
Yeah.
If you're and I would say that for any business. If you're in a restaurant business, restaurants are going to look they're night and day. I mean, they're unperceptible from what they were before COVID. how you can check out, and all of the technology has been pushed into the food industry. Tourism has completely been revolutionized. All of these things that AI is now replacing and displacing jobs. You know, there's so much happening in every industry is being affected by the rapid and exponential growth and advances in technology. Now, human beings don't change that fast. We're barely getting our heads wrapped around the social constructs that we broke free from in the 1950s, 1960s with the civil rights movements. Think about that. Your parents have not changed their minds from what they believed in when they were your age, or your kids' age, right? What you believe by the time you're in your 20s is pretty much what you're going to believe in for the majority of your life. Now, you might go from like left to right, but what you fundamentally believe about the world does not change all that much.
Yeah.
How you navigate the world doesn't change that much. And then our alligator brain, or whatever it's called, the amygdala, oblongata, all that's the lizard brain. That's what it's called. The lizard brain hasn't changed in thousands of years.
Yeah.
Right. You still have the hierarchy of need, survival mode. We all are pushed by hormones that haven't changed in a very long time. And all that stuff. Evolution takes thousands of years. So just 125 years ago, when we're bringing in, like steam engines and stuff like that put us through the Industrial Revolution, right? If you look at those inventions versus today, there's some more innovative stuff back then there are today, right? Like, so if you really think about it, we haven't gotten much better at inventing new things, right? We've just gotten faster at solving first world problems, right? And so I think that if we look at that with AI and everything like that, and as leaders, going back to the fundamentals in marketing, going back to the fundamentals and running your business, stick with the fundamentals. Don't go with fad ideas on how to run your business. You can look at new tactics, but see how they apply to your fundamentals. And if you do that, your business will do exactly what it's supposed to do at the pace that you can handle. Because believe me, I've grown businesses. This is not my only business I've had. I've been part of owners of professional football teams. I've owned cafes. I've done a couple of different other things. And some of them have blown up much faster than we expected. And we weren't able to handle it. We were unprepared for what we had unleashed. And that killed us in the end. Sometimes we'll grow something just for growth's sake versus for what your mission and your vision and for yourself and for the business.
Buzz, I could talk to you for another hour. There's just so much wisdom and insight here. Last question. I ask every guest. You've mentioned already that you are a perpetual learner, just continually in that posture, that you're learning, listening to audiobooks. Is there a book that has made a really big impact on you that you would recommend? Hey, if you haven't read this or listened to this, this is one you need to check out.
There's no one book. It depends on what you're struggling with. If you're struggling with finance in your company, you need to read Mike Michalowicz's Profit First. If you're struggling with owning a job and not a business, he also has another book called Clockwork. I'm personal friends with Mike, and he's a really good author. If you're struggling with marketing and simplification of marketing, obviously I got the Rule of 26. I've got a new book coming out in 2025 called The Simple Marketing Method that breaks down the whole thing. But if you're looking for like how you handle, one of the things I struggled with early on was my emotions. I'm a very passionate person, right? And I've got some pretty hot-headed bloodlines, Cuban, Sicilian, and Polish. Okay. So
That's awesome.
Some would call it, I used to be a hothead, right? And I would let one bad interaction with a client ruin a whole day. And so there's a book called EQ, Emotional Intelligence. It's called EQ 2.0. I can't remember who wrote it, but if you just look up emotional intelligence on Amazon, you're going to find a book called EQ 2.0 or something like that. That book changed how I managed myself and my emotions in different situations.
So good.
So those 3 books, I would say Clockwork, EQ 2.0. And then once you get to a point where you have about a dozen, anywhere between 8 and a dozen employees, Clockwork will help you start working on your business and not in your business.
Buzz, this has been so helpful. Man, I really appreciate your generosity in sharing from your journey so far and how you have been able to impact and help others and be that conduit of what you've learned. So it doesn't just benefit you, but it benefits those around you. So appreciate that. I know folks are going to want to stay connected to you and continue to learn more about what you do. What's the best way for them to do that?
If they, it depends on what they want to do. You can go to buzzworthy.biz, and that's all things that we do in marketing. We're on YouTube, the Buzzworthy Marketing channel. We have a podcast called the Buzzworthy Marketing Show. You can go to buzzworthymarketing.show. If you want a free copy of the book, just help me out with the shipping and handling. Go to ruleof26.com.
And we'll have all those links in the show notes. Buzz, thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for joining me for this episode today. As we wrap up, I'd love for you to do 2 things. First, subscribe to this podcast so you don't miss an episode. And if you find value here, I'd love it if you would rate it and review it. That really does make a difference in helping other people to discover this podcast. Second, if you don't have a copy of my newest book, Catalytic Leadership, I'd love to put a copy in your hands. If you go to catalyticleadershipbook.com, you can get a copy for free. Just pay the shipping so I can get it to you, and we'll get one right out. My goal is to put this into the hands of as many leaders as possible. This book captures principles that I've learned in 20 plus years of coaching leaders in the entrepreneurial space, in business, government, nonprofits, education, and the local church. You can also connect with me on LinkedIn to keep up with what I'm currently learning and thinking about. And if you're ready to take a next step with a coach to help you intentionally grow and thrive as a leader, I'd be honored to help you. Just go to catalyticleadership.net to book a call with me. Stay tuned for our next episode next week. Until then, as always, leaders, choose to be catalytic.
Thanks for listening to Catalytic Leadership with Dr. William Attaway. Be sure to subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts so you don't miss the next episode. Want more? Go to catalyticleadership.net.